am working from a copy of the toolbox that I have set up, and it already has the information on personnel, site, and sampler. And now we're going to click on continuous or metadata fast track, data inflow, then import raw data file from sampler, then import spreadsheet, and we navigate to where we saved our file, import me, and that was in raw. And we click on import me, say open, import successful. Now let's look at it and make sure it worked. It looks good. We've got time, date, and concentration. So we're going to click the lower X. Don't worry if you click the upper X. Go ahead and just open it again and find where you were. Click the lower X to take us back to the form. And now continue to transfer to verification table. So we're going to continue the transfer. We click on site ID 1 and it automatically populates. You only have so far one sampler ID at site 1. And we're going to set up the transfer to the data verification. I've already done that for you, so it should always look like this. If it doesn't, then we can adjust this, but it should always look like this, where you've got time being imported into the time field, you've got date being imported into the date field, and you've got PM nephelometer being imported into the concentration field. So after making sure that it looks like this, always we're going to click the lower X. Going down the steps, now we just completed step E, now we're going to start on step F, and all of these steps are described in the help file, which you can access by clicking here. So I'm just going to go ahead and transfer it. It will tell me that you're transferring data. Yes, 336 rows. That matches the number of rows in my raw data file of data, not the headers. I click yes, and now we're at step G. Let's take a look at it, and it looks good. Date is really date, and it's not always the same date. It changes to the next date. We've got times in the easiest format, which goes from hour 0 to hour 23, and then we've got concentration. So again, that looks good. I click the lower X. Now we're going to continue down the steps, and these step number, like for example step number H, corresponds to a section in the SOP help file describing this action. So I'm going to go down. I just did step G. Now I'm going to click step H, update site and sampler ID. It says this will update data in your table. Yes, because what this step is going to do is add site ID 1 and sampler ID 5030I to every single record, so that the record is complete as to what site and sampler that hour of data was gathered with. So I'm going to say yes, and then it's going to say 336 rows will have a site ID and a sampler ID in the row, which is the way AQS needs it, and the charts and graphs, and it also makes it super convenient to export into Excel. So I'm going to say yes, the 336 corresponds to the number of rows of data in my original .dat file. Remember, not the total rows, but the rows of data were 336. Click yes. And now I know, because I've already looked at the data and looked at my data logger and figured out that I don't need to worry about dates and times. But if you are unsure, you can always view dates and times and just make sure that the rollover to midnight is being logged correctly. But we know for this data that that is already the case. It usually is fine if your data go from hour 0 to hour 23, but it's a good idea to check the first time. So we're done with this screen. We're going to continue to import and qualify pollutant concentrations. Eventually, you will also be importing metadata from the same file, but right now we're just worried about the PM 2.5. So we're going to click here, and it takes you into this screen where we have to attach units, and we're telling it this is PM 2.5 continuous. The units are micrograms per cubic meter. We click K, update selected pollutant and units. We say yes, we want the fact that every row of data is PM 2.5 continuous in units of micrograms per cubic meter. Yes, and every row, 336 rows, yes. So now we just did step K, so now we're going to move on to step L, this middle section, and here you can flag data that are outside of a range, and you can go in and change these ranges if you want to, but the ranges is automatically populated with the federal MDL and then a value that is reasonable for the pollutant that you're measuring. But you can change these, and if you want to click here, this pulls up, as you can see, it's hyperlinked if you're online, to an AQS spreadsheets basically, where it tells you the federal MDL for your method. And so we're going to go ahead and see if we've got values that are less than -10 or greater than 999 for PM 2.5 in micrograms per cubic meter. That's pretty unlikely that that's valid data, but we're going to see how much of the data is outside that range, and we're going to click display, and we see, there's a lot, because we have a lot of values that are weird in this practice data set. So we're going to say, yep, those all look really weird, we want those flagged. So I'm going to say qualify these monitoring data based on these out of range concentrations, and now it says it's just flagging it. It doesn't exclude it from AQS, but since you're importing it and you're looking at this data, we do want to attach flags to every single row. We're going to click yes. So it tells us 66 rows are going to have a flag as being out of range. We have a table in the Toolbox SOPs with the flags. They correspond in most cases to AQS flags, and the flag for being out of range right now is R. So we're going to click yes, and 66 rows will be flagged. If you want to at any point in time see what rows were flagged, right now we're working with the data in the verification table. So if you want to at any time, if you want to see what the most recent action you did on your data has done to it in the verification table, you can click here and you could say, oh yeah, okay, so these were flagged R. These are the values that are less than -10, and we have a lot of strange values. Look, 60, 585, and we'll get to that. We want to make sure that these are flagged too. That is clearly not accurate. So we're going to click the lower X, and now we're going to go on. This is when we're going to get to the next issue that you see in data, where you want to make sure that you check it out to make sure what's going on is really the pollutant. So this next step, consecutive measurement difference, can flag rows where the value changed by whatever value you want. The default for PM 2.5 continuous is 30 micrograms per cubic meter, and it will flag the data where from 1 hour to the next it changes by more than whatever value you put in here. I'm going to change this to 50 because if it's very, very windy and gusty, the PM 2.5 micrograms per cubic meter concentrations really could change by 50. But if it's greater than 50 from 1 hour to the next, that's very suspect. So I'm going to click this, qualify data greater than, and what it's going to do is attach flags, and the flag will be called HD50, so it will identify what rows changed by more than 50 micrograms per cubic meter. So yes, we want to modify data, and it says 224 rows. That's a lot out of our data set, is out of 336. So this data is very jumpy, and I'm glad that we are flagging them. Now, the third thing you could flag your data on import is duplicate concentration. So this is like stuck values. When you've got a value of 12, 12, 12, 12, it's usually some error code that repeats over and over again. But let's just look for concentration values that did not change from 1 hour to the next. And it says, no, this data varies a lot, but it has no stuck values. So this flag here, duplicate concentrations from 1 hour to the next, would have flagged values that did not change for 3 hours or more, which does seem strange. That it wouldn't at all change, it would stay exactly the same for 3 whole hours. Now the next step down here is if you are entering your QC data into the Toolbox, which we highly recommend because it'll do the reports and charts for you, that would show up here. This is just a straight import, so we don't have that data. Now if you wanted to flag data based upon times, for example, if you had a time that you knew your data logger was down, you could flag it here by entering the beginning time and then the ending time. And these text boxes automatically populate with values in the data set that you're looking at now in the verification table. But we don't have any of that information now. This is just a practice data set with very jumpy data. So let's take a look at our verification table, and now you can see these flags were added. So clearly between 1 hour and the next, changing from 60 to 585, and 585 is clearly an error value, that's not accurate concentrations. So the value changed by more than 50 micrograms per cubic meter from 1 hour to the next, so it attached an HD50 flag. You can have multiple flags. So for example, this row here, negative 36 was at the same time outside the range of negative 10 to 999 because it was negative 36, and it also changed by more than 50 micrograms per cubic meter because it changed from 36.4221, then all of a sudden plummeted to negative 36. And both of those look like error values. But this gives you an idea of the different codes. You could even say, okay, now I want to see what values changed by more than 10 micrograms per cubic meter, and it would go through and flag the rows by HD10. So this looks fine. I'm going to click the lower X, and now I'm going to transfer it into the data archive table. And the data archive table is where all your data will be appended, data set by data set. So I'm going to click there. It's going to say it's going to modify data. Yes, it's going to append 336 rows, and this is the first import into the archive table. So that's fine. And now let's look at it and make sure that it all went in there. And here's the data just as we have it, with the qualifiers and jumpy values and all. So now we have to clear the data verification table, which is the table we've been working in. I'm going to say yes, and it's deleting them from the verification table. We're done. Eventually, you can go back in now and pull out the metadata from that data set that you were importing, but right now we're only worried about PM 2.5. So I'm going to say yes, and now I'm going to say close forms and clear the data import table because we've gone through the data, we've put it into the archive table, made sure it's flagged correctly. We are done with that data set that we just imported. So it'll say it'll delete the data import table. If you've already imported everything from it, go ahead and do this. We have, yes. And now this takes us back, and we've got the data into the toolbox, and the next step is final data validation, reports and charts, and AQS data file creation.